All right, I'm just going to take a minute and go over what you need to do in class today in order to make sure that you're on track to finish this by the end of January and when this is complete. Okay, so number one, I'm just going to quickly go over what you need to be submitting to College Board and what you need to turn into class today. All right, so your goal is to have your program code complete by today, and you're going to either upload your program code or your video into the digital portfolio. Now, it is very important. Do not hit the final submit button because you can change your program code or your video up until you hit final submit. If you've decided to change some of your program code after doing your responses, then you will not be able to change anything on College Board if you've done the final submit. So do not hit the final submit button until you have completed everything, okay? Remember that in order to upload your program code, what you're gonna do is you're going to take snippets of all of your program code. You can either put that into a Google Doc or you can put that into a Google Slides, and then you will save that as a PDF that you will then upload into College Board, okay? Remember, you're going to create your video. Your video can be no more than 1 minute, okay? It should not have you speaking in it. Sounds from your program are okay, but no voices of yourself, all right? And then also just make sure as you're uploading stuff, do not put your name on anything, okay? All right, so by the end of class today, you want to make sure you finish response 3A and turn that in Schoology, and you need to complete the upload to both the program code and the video in your digital portfolio. All right, so you need to make sure that you've saved all of your code into a PDF. You need to make sure you've completed your video. If you need some help on your video, you can log in and it will help you. You need to upload your code. This is the PDF and your video to the digital portfolio. Now, if you end up making changes to your video, the College Board will accept the most recent submission. So if you submit 3 videos, it will accept the most recent one. You need to complete your responses to 3A. That's what's due in class today. And then you can begin response 3B if you want to, but you don't need to worry about that until next class period. If you have any questions about what the exam is going to look like and your responses, if you click on that link and then scroll down to right here, this is what your written responses will look like exactly in College Board, okay? And remember, you can, what we're writing in our responses, 3A and 3B, you will literally copy and paste into College Board. All right, so you're gonna submit your create task to the digital portfolio, so you're gonna click on this link right here. All right, make sure you type in your username and password and your information for your digital portfolio will show up, okay? If you need some instructions on how to use the digital portfolio, they are all in here, okay? You can look through those if you have any questions about them. Okay, so we've gone through rows 1 through 6. Remember, your graded 0s or 1s. So today we're just gonna focus on row 1 and response 3A. All right, so the video, make sure, demonstrates your input, the functionality, and the output. And remember, you have to have 2 different inputs that show 2 different outputs or 2 different paths in your program. So the written response needs to describe the purpose of the program, all right? Remember, you need to be specific here, explaining what the program does. Explain what functionality the program is demonstrated in the video. So you're gonna explain specifically what your video showed the program doing, and then you need to describe the input and output of the program demonstrated by the video. So remember, you're gonna show 2 different inputs that result in 2 different outputs, and whatever you showed in the video is what you need to use in your responses, all right? So if your responses are different from your video, then you will not earn credit. Okay, so if you'd like to watch this video again, so remember row 1 is the video shows your input, the functionality, how the program works, and then the output. Your written responses must correspond and be the same as what is shown in the video. Make sure that you're describing the function of the program very clearly. Okay, so here's just some examples. You can read through these. We've already looked at these before, but if you take a look at 3A, describes the overall purpose of the program. This is very specific. The purpose of the program is to create a database for brides and guests. They can input any number of items into the registry lists, and then the guest can determine if an item's on the list and decide if they want to buy it. That is specific. Don't just say this is a game to entertain users. Be specific about what you're doing, what the input, what the output is, okay? The functionality of the programming as demonstrated in the video. The video shows a user inputting a bride and then checking items as a guest, okay? Specifically, what did you do in the video, okay? And then the input and output. Now, notice, remember your video has to have 2 different inputs to 2 different outputs. You need to describe both of those inputs and outputs in this portion. The bride uses this program. They'll input the text in the form of items for the registry. The output will be the text indicating whether or not the item is found in the list. Okay, very specific. So that's your one input. Your second input is as a guest. The guest uses this program. They'll input text in the form of items. The program will check to see if the item is found on the list, and the output text will indicate whether or not the item is on the list. So very specific here, so be clear, okay? All right, so that was row 1. This is row 2 and response 3B. Now, we've already talked about this part. The written portion is going to be your 2 program code segments, one that shows how the data is being stored in the list, one that shows how the data in the list is being used as part of the program's purpose. Now remember, you don't necessarily have to have the list in the procedure. You just have to have the list so that it fulfills a purpose. It can't be obsolete. You have to make sure you're actually using it. Now, make sure that you state the name of the list whenever you're writing about this. Okay, and then also make sure that you state the name of the variable, which is basically like the name of the list, okay? You have to describe what data is contained in the list. Like, is it a text? Is it a string? Is it names? Make sure you're very specific here, okay? And also just keep in mind, if you copy and paste more than 2 program code segments, they will only use the first 2 code segments to determine whether or not the point is earned. Okay. All right. So number 2, you need to submit 2 program code segments. One is showing how the data is stored in the list. So this is how you're gathering your information in a list. Or if you already have data that's previously stored in the list, make sure you show how that data is actually being stored in your list, what you did to put it in there, and then how the list helps to fulfill the program's purpose. So you have to actually use the list. Right here, this is showing how they're adding specific items to the list. If you've already added items to the list, you can use that as your code segment. Okay, and then you also have to show how the data in the list helps to fulfill the program's purpose. Now keep in mind, you do not have to call the list in the procedure, you just have to show somewhere where the list is being used. In this particular instance, the registry wish list is used in the procedure, but it does not have to be, okay? So the procedure determines where the item is in the list and then deletes it. So this is using the list in order to help fulfill the program's purpose of removing an item from the registry gift list. Okay, so rows 2 and 3 in response 3B focus on the data abstraction or the use of a list. Okay, so just make sure your written response includes the program code that shows the list being used to manage the complexity, explains how the name selected list manages complexity in the program by explaining why the program could not be written or how it could be written differently without using the list. Okay, so basically you have to make sure that you're explaining how the list actually fulfills the program's purpose and how it is important, okay? You will not get credit if you do not include the name of the list. So you have to make sure that you're including the name of the list. If the use of the list is irrelevant, so if your list serves no purpose in your program, you're not going to get credit. If your explanation does not apply to the selected list, So make sure, like I said, whatever list you show in your video, you're naming your list and responses, and you're using that same list as your Snagit for your program code, okay? You need to explain how the list manages complexity, all right? So basically, how does it make your program easier to run by using the list, okay? If the use of the list does not result in the program being easier to develop or run, then you won't get credit. So make sure that your list is fulfilling a purpose in your program, okay? If the use of the list does not result in a program that's easier to maintain, meaning that future changes to the size of the list could cause significant modifications to the code. So basically, if you're changing the list, you shouldn't have to modify your code in order to make sure that it works. All right, so here is what your response is going to look like. Notice how this says identifies the name of the list being used, the registry wish list, describes what data is contained in the list. Now, very specific, we're naming the list again. The data in the registry wish list are strings, so be specific. Okay, so strings are numbers, letters, whatever. You can say texts that represent items, what is being in the list, input by the bride. Explains how the list manages complexity or how the program could not be written. Without the use of the list, the functionality of the guess would disappear. So basically, we would not be able to check to see what was on the list to see what we could purchase for the guest. All right. The list allows the user to continuously add items. All right. So it's a dynamic list. I wouldn't have to change the program code when I continue to add items to the list. Without the list, there'd be no functionality to the program. Okay, so your check-in is your code should be finished. You want to gather all of your code into the PDF and upload that onto the video or digital portfolio, which the links are in this slideshow. Is your video finished? You need to upload your video to the digital portfolio. And did you finish response 3A? You do not need to start 3B. You can if you want to. So in order to do response 3A, you're going to go onto Schoology. Okay, and then you'll notice that response 3A is right here. So notice these are the same questions that you're answering here that later on you're going to copy and paste into College Board. The overall purpose of the program, your functionality. Remember, this is all based on your video. Okay, what is the input demonstrated in the video? What is the output demonstrated in the video? You want two here. 2 inputs, 2 different outputs. Okay, so 2 inputs describe 2 different outputs. If you have any questions, please feel free to message me or email me.